My guest on the afternoon show today is Simon Fell. Welcome to Can Do FM again, Simon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, thanks so much for coming on, because I know that you must be extremely busy at this time. But I really wanted to ask you how it's gone. How has your first 6 months gone being an MP?
Not quite as I expected them to go, to be perfectly honest. This is an incredible job, and I'm honoured to have it. But you start from a standing start. You've got no staff, no office, anything like that. So the first few months was getting that in place, and now I've got a great team, and we've got an office on Cavendish Street. So sort of felt like we were hitting the ground running and we were doing well. Then, of course, coronavirus hit. And, as with you, as with everyone else, our way of working and our way of life has completely changed. So it's now adapting to that new way of operating. But I think we're doing an okay job. But It'll be up to your listeners to pass judgment on that.
Okay, now then, we saw you on the TV last week raising concerns about disadvantaged children, or children from disadvantaged backgrounds, perhaps falling through an education gap. Do you want to explain that one a little bit for us?
Yeah, so this is an idea which the chair of the Select Committee for Education raised a little while ago. And as we start to bring children back to school, one of the things he was interested in was the idea of a catch-up premium. So children from disadvantaged backgrounds having more money and resources allocated to them, so actually they don't fall far behind because of coronavirus. Because what we know is, children from those sorts of backgrounds, they really struggle. They need the extra support in schools. Teachers are fantastic at giving, but actually this time out, what we don't want to see is them sliding back even further. So Robert, the chair of the Select Committee, has raised it a few times. I thought, given I had a question to the Prime Minister, given it's a live issue for Barrow, it would be a good opportunity to raise it and try and get the profile on this campaign raised a little bit further. So
what will that entail? Are you talking about sort of free iPads, those sorts of things being given to families?
This should be for when schools go back. So what it would be increased funding for schools which sit within areas of deprivation. So, as we know, sadly, we have quite a few of those within Barrow. So it's about making sure that they get those additional funds. It's a campaign at the moment, but the Education Secretary said he was open to the idea. The Prime Minister said there's more support on the way. So I hope if we just keep pushing, we might be able to get there.
Yeah, talking about schools going back, the teaching unions have been quite vocal on setting out a 5-stage plan before advising their members to go back to school. What are your views on that?
Have they been vocal? I haven't noticed.
It's been all over my Facebook page.
Yeah, mine too.
Maybe that's because I'm an ex-teacher.
I think the thing is, we need to get children back to school. We need it to happen when it's safe to do so, and that means safe for the children and safe for the teachers, of course. But we need it to happen because the longer this goes on, the more it's going to impact those children, especially, going back to your earlier question, children who come from deprived backgrounds. They really benefit from that school environment. But the teachers' unions are right to raise these concerns, because we can only do this when it's safe. Whether it's at school or whether it's in a business, this whole thing now about loosening up the controls we've got around coronavirus, we can only do it if people feel safe and feel confident about those measures. So we've got to make sure that we're able to, where we can, socially distance. And I know that's really hard in the school.
That's true, isn't it? I mean, that's the problem. Yeah, there seems to be some disparity between levels of safety, or what we consider to be safe. I mean, in most schools, everyone's got an experience of schools, the narrow corridors, small classrooms. How can we possibly, even just the children themselves, not just the little ones, but older ones, they touch each other all the time. It's near impossible to get them to understand how, to keep apart from each other.
Yeah, well, I've got a 9-month-old and a 4-year-old, so I know that they don't take to social distancing very well, and in a school environment that's going to be even harder. But I'm no expert in this, but you've got to be guided by the science, and the science says actually, children are less receptive to this virus. If they do get it, they tend to bounce back very quickly or not even show symptoms.
Yeah, but that's not the point, though, is it? The point is that they're carrying it. But they can carry it. So then they're taking it, they're passing it to the teachers, and then they're taking it home to their families and passing it on to their families. And, there doesn't seem to be any guidelines about quarantining, for example, the children from key workers who the schools have done this fantastic job over these past few weeks of looking after. But these children are high risk children. The likelihood that they are carrying the virus, particularly here in Barrow, which we can get back to later, is quite high.
Well, as I say, it's got to be about safety. So we've got to make sure that whatever we can make safe is made safe in that context. But I think there's a broader point, and I'm sure we're going to come on to this further in the interview, but we've got to look at how we get the economy moving again, because coronavirus is a terrible thing. A single case of it is just awful. We don't want anyone to catch it at all. But what will kill more people than coronavirus is poverty. That is proven. You look through history, you look at what's happened in Barrow in the past. Poverty has such a terrible impact on people's lives, their life chances, their livelihoods, their ability to move through society, their ability to get better paid jobs, to be socially mobile, to not be excluded, to have good health outcomes. It impacts across the piece. So if we don't start getting the economy moving, if we just keep wrapping ourselves in this ball of cotton wool, actually the consequences will be even worse. And that's a terrible balance and a terrible decision to have to make, but that's the one we're in now. So that's why it's very gentle opening up of the economy, and that's what we're looking at, but only doing it safely.
And I want to ask you, Simon, I don't know if you've seen, but there's an article in The Guardian that's doing the rounds, basically saying that the COVID-19 statistics for Barrow are quite scary, 4 times higher than in other parts of the country. I'd like to hear your views on that, really.
So obviously we should be concerned by those figures, but we need to understand them as well. And this is really important. So if you look at some of the underlying health issues we have in the community, so we have an aging population, we have some long-term health concerns here, which are more prevalent in Barrow and the local community than elsewhere in the country. They are reasons to think that people may be more susceptible to coronavirus here. We also have high-density housing. That is another driver of passage of coronavirus. But what these figures are actually telling us is about the transmission of the virus. It's not about whether you're more susceptible to it, it's about the transmission of that virus. And actually, if you listen to Colin Cox, the Director of Public Health in Cumbria, or if you speak to anyone in the Department of Health, they're relatively reassured that the reason those figures are so high is because we are served by an excellent hospital trust in Morecambe Bay, who are doing 2 to 3 times more testing than other areas around the country. And obviously, if you ask 2 to 3 times more questions, you're going to get 2 to 3 times more answers.
Okay.
So that explains why those figures are higher.
Yeah.
The other thing to bear in mind is we got the virus earlier here, about 3 weeks earlier. So that testing process started earlier. And we've also been testing, thanks again to Aaron Cummings and the leadership at Morecambe Bay Trust, into care homes, which other areas have only just started doing.
But that leads me to the question then. So what are we saying, that here in Barrow we have a real picture of what's happening with COVID-19 and the rest of the country are behind us, and that once testing starts happening in the rest of the country, we'll realise that it is actually 4 times worse than we thought it was? And if that's the case, have the government based their lockdown, the releasing of lockdown, on faulty figures, faulty data? Is it 4 times worse than we think it is?
So I think what you can't do is judge so we're not judging apples with apples at the moment. When you look at, so if you look at the top 3 areas on that list, it's Barrow, it's South Lakes, it's Lancaster. They're all served by the same hospital trust. If you move across the Pennines, they're not using the same methodology. They're not testing at the same rate. So you're not looking at the same thing. But government, when they take these figures in, and Public Health England and SAGE, when they look at them, are taking into account those balances. So when they're judging the R number, when they're judging the infection rate, they're obviously equalising these out as best they can. So I can't speak to what the rate of infection is around the country. I can't speak to what that R rate is, but certainly those who are looking at these figures are doing that.
Right. So, taken then that we've got better testing in this area and that we know that the figures are what they are, shouldn't Barrow be treated differently? I mean, the Prime Minister made it quite clear that if he thought that the infection rate was rising or was getting too much, that new measures would be put into place. So do you think the government are going to start treating different areas of the country specifically? And if so, what's happening to protect the people here in Barrow?
So I think they will start to treat different parts of the country differently, but that will come from looking at these figures. And as I was saying before, the figures that are published in The Guardian talking about our area, about Barrow, South Lakes and Lancaster, can't be looked at hand in hand with the figures for even down in Preston in Lancashire. They are not the same.
No.
So it's for SAGE to make that judgment. And the judgment at the moment is that even though, because we're doing more testing, we've got a higher reported level, actually that's not a reason for concern at this time. But if they start to see an increase in the R in our area, then those restrictions will come in place again. So that might be less ability to travel to work. It might be restriction in exercise, measures like that. But we're not there yet. And these judgments are being made across the UK. But as the Prime Minister has been really clear, if they start to see concerns, in Barrow or Bolsover or wherever, then they'll start to turn those screws to try and keep that infection rate to below 1.
Yeah. But Lee Roberts, Deputy Leader of Barrow Council, in that Guardian article said that he, as far as he was aware, nobody from central government has been in touch. Nobody's, there's been no particular concern shown or interest shown in looking at those figures for Barrow and helping.
I'll just say now
to the council to help them.
I'll say now that's completely incorrect. So, I'm in touch with the Department of Health every single day. Yeah. Professor Colin Cox from Cumbria County Council is the same. That dialogue is constant. Those figures are fed through daily. The Morecambe Bay Trust is in constant contact with the government. So, they are monitoring these figures. That is part of their job, and it's how they judge the R rate, the infection rate around the country, and then the response to that infection rate.
Okay. Any plans to extend that testing out to people who aren't key workers at the moment? Do you know of?
Yes. Yeah. So they hit the 125,000 target. 100,000 target. The plan now is to go to 200,000. Obviously, as they do that, what that means is more testing in more environments and to people outside of that key worker range as well. So that is happening. It's on track. And I think it was yesterday, day before, we saw substantial increase in care home testing. So not just those who are symptomatic, but just people in care homes, full stop. So you can expect to see more of that going into schools and other key worker environments and then into the wider community too. Okay, good. We're going to talk a little bit now about how Barrow can bounce back. This is the slogan, isn't it? Bounce back into business. How do you think Barrow is going to cope with that, Simon? Well, I think we're in a good position, and that's for a couple of reasons. So, we have a large employer in BAE who have a long trail of contract work with the government. That is 1 in 3 of the working age population work there. So, that will already be a big help to the local economy, that we have something like that where they can get people back into work, and they can start spending their money locally again. Most places don't have that surety, so they're going to have a far more uncertain time. But we're also poised in Barrow to have some extra government funding spent on us. So we have the Brilliant Barrow campaign. If any of your listeners haven't engaged in it, I urge them to do so far, because it's an opportunity to get 25 million from the government to spend in Central Barrow. But on top of that, we also have high streets funding, historic high streets funding. So there's money coming into the centre of town. If we do that work right, and if we get the public engaged in it, which will actually see local businesses benefiting. So I'm hopeful we can bounce back, but it's going to be rocky. And what it's going to mean is that your listeners are going to have to come in and shop in town and support those local businesses, because they're going to need local customers more than ever now.
Okay,